everyone. I'm Richard Corley again. I'm a faculty member at UIC, and I'm here to welcome you once again to Backstage at UIC. This is a forum we're doing for all the plays this year and beyond, where we're looking at how these plays are being put together and what the process has been for everyone backstage. So again, thank you for joining us. And today we're very lucky to have Tasia Jones, who is the director of this production of The Crucible by Arthur Miller that will be going up in just a couple of weeks. So I know it's still in the process of all being put together, and I know you're very, very busy with everything right now, but thank you so much for taking a few minutes for us, Tasia, and letting us in on the process. We had a meeting in a separate discussion with designers and one of the actors, and that was a very interesting discussion, as I'm sure you can imagine. And,
wish I knew what they said.
Well, I'm sure that you know the main thing they said, which I guess I'm sure that you will second, and I would definitely want to open this up to your thoughts about the process, is that it was very, very collaborative. Mm-hmm. and that there was a lot of input from everyone in the process. And I first wanted to start off by saying this is a play, not all of our plays are like this, but this is a play that, you know, many young people or older people who are going to see this are going to know this play, because it's a play that gets read in high school, and it's an American classic. And it's a play that they will know from having read it, kind of exists in three worlds. And this is something I wanted to talk to you about, that you know, you've got the Salem witch trials of the 1600s, and you've got the 1950s with Miller kind of writing this in response to the McCarthy hearings and so forth. And then you've got today. Right. And so sort of three worlds there. And I wanted to sort of start with that as a director, because I find that a really fascinating entry point to sort of see where your way of looking at this was from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll say first that I agree that this was a highly collaborative process, not just with designers, but with the actors, given that we are doing a virtual production and, you know, have what we have right at our disposal. And the students are really in charge and have a lot of agency in how they are filmed, because they're doing the filming for a lot of this process. And so we really needed their input, and we really needed to make sure we were collaborating with them and doing what worked best for each actor. And so I was really excited to see that, actually, that how collaborative we were able to be in this process. To your question about, you know, this play existing in three worlds, you know, it always existed in more than one, right? You know, when Miller wrote it, he was using the Salem witch trials as an allegory, right, for what was happening in his present time, right, in his moment, right, and speaking to his present day context, right. And so I think because the play started that way, it has existed that way throughout time, right? And so many productions have picked it up and seen how it applies to the current moment, right? What themes feel really relevant to today, you know, today being like every today since it was written, right? And for our current moment in 2021, or actually, you know, in 2020, in the beginning of 2020, when I first pitched this play to the department, I was thinking about, you know, how does this play live in this time period, right? What are the things that feel like a through line from 1692 to 2020? And so much of it, unfortunately, right, feels really relevant still. You know, part of that was about how our judicial system is not entirely fair, right? And that, you know, in the Salem witch trials, you have people claiming their innocence and pleading their innocence, and there's really not much they can do to defend themselves other than to say, I didn't do that thing that I'm being accused of, right? And there wasn't a lot of, you know, there wasn't belief, you know, there wasn't anything working on their side, you know, to say, okay, well, how do you prove that you're not a witch, right? How do you prove it? You know, it's in the play, right? It's their word against the victims, right? Or the accuser. And in our present judicial system, right, our judicial system does not favor the innocent, right? If you are innocent of a crime, all you can do is say, I didn't do it. I don't know what to tell you, right? And then it's supposed to be up to the prosecution to prove that you did this thing, but so often it feels like it's the opposite, right? That the defendant has to prove that they didn't commit this crime. And you know, without going down the rabbit hole of our judicial system, right? That what is asked of someone who is pleading innocence is, you know, it would be better for you to plead guilty, right? Or to take a plea bargain, right? And this is what kind of happens in the play, right? That the people who are accused are told, confess, and you know, it will be better for you. You won't be put to death if you confess. And so there's no reward for maintaining one's innocence, right? So there was that piece of it that I felt like strongly tied to our current moment. And then there was this piece about how accusation can turn into, how rumor can turn into accusation, can turn into charge, can turn into angry mob, and a mindset over an entire population. And how, you know, where and how do we see that playing out in our present day context, right? And the way that we engage with one another through social media, you know, and how like something can be put online and then quickly like spreads like wildfire and becomes the truth, right? Whether it is the truth or isn't the truth, right? It becomes the truth because it becomes a part of that web, right? Of that, the way that people are communicating. And this connected to me to call out culture and cancel culture, right? And those things are different. And I think that's important to distinguish them, right? That call out culture, you know, wanting to hold people accountable for things they've done wrong or harm they've caused, right? Makes sense, right? And it is, you know, often it's a noble pursuit. Cancel culture sometimes ends up being a different thing, right? Where it becomes about destroying that person, right? And, you know, this is on macro and micro levels, right? Where it's in smaller communities, it's, you know, about personal relationship, or it's about something that someone has done on a more micro level to someone in their community, or someone that is more known in wider society, right? And so we talked a lot about those things and how they exist in the play, where they exist, what didn't line up, right? It's not, you know, they're not perfect parallels. And what we wanted to investigate when we entered the play. And then how we would do that in this medium, right? And how that might be different than how we would do it if we were in a physical theater space on a stage.
Right, right. Well, I want to get to that in just a moment because that's that's a fascinating and incredibly challenging, and I'm sure also in some respects rewarding issue to explore. But before we get to that, I wanted to just ask you about what you've been saying, which is really fascinating, the themes that you've kind of unpacked for the play, for the contemporary world. And when you approached that in terms of the visual world and the acting world and so forth, what were some of the things that were, you discovered, or that you explored, or what came up in looking at the play in this way?
Well, we knew that we didn't want it to, I mean, I'll say this, that we are bound by certain restrictions, right? When doing a play that is this well known and by a very famous published playwright that has an estate, right? There are certain boundaries we have to work within that we're aware of, right? And
yes.
And we didn't really want to take it out of 1692 because so much of the play is specific to the time, right? And specific to that community and that society. And that's important, right? Is to understand that those people are not us, that they are working from a different context, and living their lives within a different context. There are similarities, of course, but obviously it's not the same world in 1692 that we're living in today. So that was important to still have like a nod to that time, right? And to be mindful of the text itself and how people speak to one another, and what were the conventions of the time, and social conventions, religious conventions, like how did people interact with one another, what was socially acceptable, all of those things, right? But we also wanted to have a nod to our present day context as well. And given that we're also working, with students filming themselves inside their own homes, right? We had to be flexible about what could remain of like the 1692 world and what could be of 2021, right? And so we knew we had to meld the two, right? Like there was no other way to do it except for to try and meld the two. And there is kind of a little bit of a nod also to, other time periods, right? Throughout time, right? Just in our costume designers' costume design, right? Stephanie was thinking about like, okay, what can we provide to the actors that is going to, one, give them a sense of character and give them a sense of context, right? But two, give our viewer an idea of how we're like blending these worlds. And so, we kept collars for the young girls, right? And for all of the female identifying characters, we kept some sort of like collar, which was very much of the 1690s, right? But we didn't do bonnets, it was a collar, but with like a 70s bell sleeve, but also the men, are in very contemporary jackets, and dress shirts and things like that. So we're playing with both time periods. And then other than that, we wanted to keep the backgrounds as neutral as possible so that the viewer can add on, right? The viewer can bring themselves to it and bring their own lens to it without there being too much in the way of that. But then, of course, there's the editing process, right? Which also, as we're doing that now, will add a whole nother layer to how the viewer experiences the world of the play.
Absolutely. Well, and so I guess we're at that point of talking about this, doing this particular play in this particular way. What were the discoveries that you made in doing it that maybe enhanced it or changed the way you were approaching it? I'm sure there were a lot of there's a bit of improvisation in this whole process.
For sure. There was a lot of learning on our feet about, what it meant to work in this way. A virtual production, it's not quite traditional theater, right? In the way that we're used to seeing and thinking about it on a stage, in terms of how the actors have to or can interact with one another, right? All of our actors, with the exception of 2, were in separate spaces, right? And so how do you play a scene when, you're not able to look at your scene partner and connect with them the way you would like to, right? How do you do a group scene where you have several people in a scene and they're, everyone's trying to connect with other people, but nobody can see each other. And we had Zoom, which was really helpful. But we learned that the play wanted to exist more in this sort of hybrid space, right? Like we could not duplicate the stage in the way that, one would expect it to appear on a stage, right? Like it just couldn't, that we had to use what we had and we had to embrace the medium that we were working within. And it kind of started leaning more towards a very like cinematic quality, right? Where we also figured out that we didn't really want to be like looking at each other through the screen. That we wanted to get the sense that like I'm talking to someone over here, and that the camera was more of a voyeur to what was happening, versus using that camera as scene partner. Although there are specific moments where we chose to do that. But those kinds of things, figuring out what made sense for the characters and what made sense for the medium in which we were working, and then like trying to keep an eye and like trying to think ahead to, okay, when we edit this together, what is that going to feel like, or what would we like it to feel like once we chop up all of this footage and put it together. And it's a great deal of work, which also is something we learned. It's a great deal of work to and time, right, to just figure out like, okay, how do we light everyone's space the same when they're in different spaces, right? Like how can we create consistency? And the designers on this production are amazing. Our lighting designer was incredible at guiding the students through, okay, like this is what this light is. This is what this light can do. Hold the light this way, try it this way, and troubleshooting with them because they were in charge of their own tech, and it was a lot. It was a lot to ask of these performers to be in charge of their lighting, their sound equipment, their filming equipment, film themselves, right? Upload all of that footage, it's just a lot. And everyone was so game, which I so appreciate that.
Well, that's fabulous.
It just jumped right in, which is great.
Well, that sort of leads me to my last question for you, which is, am I right in saying this is the first time you've directed at UIC?
Yes, this is the first time I've directed at UIC.
So that was my last question, because of course we're here for UIC Backstage and to talk about the program, and I wanted to just get your thoughts on the experience of working with these particular students. And I know you've taught and directed at other places, and what was your experience like with these UIC students on this production?
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to teach at UIC, and I hadn't yet directed at UIC, but I had taught a couple classes and got to know, some of the students in that way, right? Slightly different relationship, right? But UIC students are incredible, just so flexible, so ready, and willing to explore and try things and make mistakes and try something else, which is all I'm ever looking for in actors, right? Is people who are willing to play, not be afraid to make mistakes and mess up and try something new, right? And learn that together. And like I said before, it was such a learning process for everyone involved, because not many of us had done anything like this before in terms of how we were making this play. I directed some Zoom readings and workshops, but nothing to this level, right? This magnitude, the undertaking that this was. And to have, those students be so understanding and be so gracious and patient with each other and with themselves and with the production team. You can't.
A cast of, excuse me for asking, but a cast of how many?
I think 18.
Yeah,
Principal, and then we had understudies as well, so it was very large.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's hard enough. It's a huge play to do, in the theater, but to coordinate all of this in this medium, how extraordinary.
Oh, and I'll say, the coordination of that, shout out to our production manager and our student stage manager, who was phenomenal in coordinating and organizing and keeping everyone on task and doing everything they needed to do. Lauren Littlejohn was amazing. So I have to, and my student assistant directors and the assistant video editor and assistant sound designer, and like all of the students who worked on this really gave it their all, and really worked at a really high level, right? Like I was asking them to really work as professionals in the space. And that's part of directing here is teaching as well, and is teaching, having teaching moments about, how do we work as professionals in a space? And how does that change when we're in this virtual space, right? And we still want to create a really cohesive and a really complex product. And they did it. They did it without reservation, really.
Well, it sounds like they had a wonderful leader in doing all of this, and I'm so excited to see it in a couple of weeks. I'm sure. It's a bit of it's a strange thing I'm a director myself. It's a strange thing to put something together like this and not then have a opening night cast party where you're all, you know what I mean? All of that stuff that we love to do and come back and see it again and give notes and all of that's a strange world we're in.
We had a nice little wrap party over Zoom when we wrapped filming. And, we wanted to just have a space where we could just kind of relax and breathe and be like, we did that, the play's not done. We still have a lot of work to do, but, for the performers, their part is kind of backwards in the way we're usually used to working, right? Like usually the director and the design team, we're with them for a while, and then the play is theirs to carry forward and perform night after night. And in this situation, they ended last week their part of, performing and filming it. And now we carry on with the post-production process of editing and putting it all together. And then it will just be out there, right, for the world to see. So it's a different process, and so we wanted to acknowledge that, that work.
Yeah, wow. Well, thank you so much for taking a few minutes in the middle of all that process to chat with us, and really appreciate it. And we're all very excited to see it. And thank you so much. And Guillermo, thank you for setting this up. on your end. And well, we'll all look forward to seeing the Crucible very, very soon.
Yes, please watch it. There's so much work
Oh.
put into it, so I hope
No.
people enjoy it.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're very excited, right, Guillermo? Here we go. Okay, take care.
Thank you.